All right, well, this morning, children's church, or children are dismissed to children's church. And if parents or grandparents can take them back to Miss Brittany and sign them in and get them ready to go, they're going to have some fun back there today for sure. Well, we have been in the book of Joshua, and we're almost finished with this difficult book. Joshua has not been the easiest book for us to read and to process. There's a lot of challenging stuff. Next week, I think, will be our last sermon from Joshua. And then we get kind of the fun stuff from Joshua. It's Joshua's farewell address. We'll be reading that this week. So more of the stuff that we're familiar with, more of the stuff that resonates with us, and less of the details of places and people that we don't know who they are. And then we're going to move into Judges, which is another difficult book. It's not going to get any easier for us, but again, there's lessons for us as we continue to unpack the story of what God has been doing on this earth. The last few weeks of Joshua have been really hard. We have read a lot of names and places, and we don't recognize either of them. We don't recognize the names. We don't recognize the places. It's been kind of challenging. It's been one of those sections where I'm pretty sure if I checked the click rate on our daily email that some of you probably have been skipping out, and that's okay. I understand. Have been tempted to myself, except I didn't know what questions would come up on Wednesday nights. We're almost through that section. In fact, I think tomorrow we finish that section. The Levites get their land tomorrow, and then we're going to move into a little bit sections, a little bit different, easier section. Today we read the cities of refuge, and we're going to talk about that this morning. Tomorrow the Levites get their land, and then there's some conflict as the tribes go back to their homeland, the land that they had been given. There's some conflict that erupts. Imagine that. When the land is distributed and you actually get to go live in it, people start fighting. Never would happen in this world. And then Joshua's farewell address, which is a powerful part of Joshua. It is a powerful section for us. I think there's a lot we'll gain from that. Now, when we started reading a couple of years ago, we started with Genesis and Exodus, and then we skipped a couple of books. We skipped Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And John, you and I had this conversation. It's not that there's not valuable stuff in there. It's really God giving the laws and the guidelines to guide a new society. It's very important stuff. Not quite as applicable to us today, and part of that is because we understand things like hygiene. A lot of what you read in Leviticus is talking about don't touch dead things. It's kind of like my parents used to tell me. We'd go for a walk in the wood. Don't touch dead things. Bowman, does your dad ever have to tell you that? Yeah, leave that. Don't touch that. Don't pick that up. Or when the kids are little, don't put that in your mouth. It's a lot of hygiene stuff, but which is absolutely imperative that the people know because they've been slaves. They've only been able to handle what has been given to them by their Egyptian slave masters. So now they have to learn all of this stuff. Some of these concepts, though, are brought back up in the book of Joshua. And these are concepts that are helpful for us to dig into and to look at. Concepts like the cities of refuge. Now, the example that the Israelites had of everything as they're coming into the promised land is Egypt. And Egypt was not a good culture. It was not a good society. It was a society that did everything from a very selfish perspective, that Pharaoh got what Pharaoh wanted, and he would oppress anybody who got in his way. We could point fingers at governments like that around the world today. We're not going to do that, but we could. But God did not want the Israelites to leave slavery, to leave that culture, and come and create a new Egypt in a different land. God wanted them to create something different, a culture that cared about people, that took seriously the realities that people were facing, a culture that said, we want to do things the right way. We want to do things in a way that recognizes humanity and not in a way that oppresses humanity. He didn't want them to just come out of Egypt and create a new Egypt. But as we keep reading in Judges, That's exactly what they're fighting to do. They're trying really hard to recreate what they already had. They're trying to recreate the gods that they'd already worshiped. And some would say that the challenge was not getting the Israelites out of Egypt, the challenge was getting Egypt out of the Israelites. And I'm guessing that if you took us and put us all in a big basket on a balloon and flew us somewhere and tried to create a new culture just out of us, we would struggle to get Montana or the United States out of us. It's ingrained in us. My guess is if we landed in a new land, the first thing we would be talking about is, what's the Wi-Fi password? What do you mean there's no Wi-Fi? I can't get any reception on my phone. Where's the nearest restaurant? I don't want to cook today. All of the things that we're so used to. And for the Israelites, as they're coming out of Egypt, so much of their life was centered around the Egyptian worship system and the Egyptian gods. God is trying to get Egypt out of the people, and he's wanting them to not create a society that looks just like Egypt. Instead, he wanted them to create a culture that pointed everyone who came through, and again, as we talked a couple of weeks ago, this was the crossroads. God intentionally put them on I-90 so that everybody would travel through here. And he wanted everybody who traveled through to say, in our interaction with these people, we can't believe what an amazing God they have. That was the point. God wanted their culture to point people to him. And a part of that is providing fair and just laws, which is not the most common thing in the ancient world. The ancient world was not consumed with being just and fair as we are today. They were consumed with wealth and power and dominance. And so it was not so much about how can we make sure everybody's getting a fair shake, it's how can we dominate. And God is saying, that's not who my people are going to be. That's not the culture that we're going to set up. And so one of the things that was addressed in Numbers and is brought up again here in Joshua is that there has to be a place of refuge in case somebody makes a mistake, they accidentally kill someone. It's not like it's an intentional murder, and Numbers goes into great detail as to clarifying the difference. But they have to have a place that they can go in case somebody accidentally kills someone, that they can seek refuge. So I want us to read Joshua's version of this passage. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua. I want you to pay attention to that. The Lord hasn't spoken to Joshua for quite a while in what we've been reading. So when the Lord speaks to Joshua, that means it's time for something significant again. We're not just talking about names and places again. There's something significant here. Tell the Israelites, select your cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that a person who kills someone unintentionally or accidentally may flee there. These will be your refuge from the avenger of blood. When someone flees to one of these cities, stands at the entrance of the city gate, and states his case before the elders of that city, they are to bring him into the city and give him a place to live among them. And if the avenger of blood pursues him, they must not hand over the one who committed manslaughter over to him, for he killed his neighbor accidentally and did not hate him beforehand. He is to stay in that city until he stands trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest serving at that time. Then the one who committed manslaughter may return home to his own city from which he fled. So they designated Kadesh in the hill country of Naphtali in Galilee, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim. We've heard of Shechem before, haven't we? Kirithia, whatever it is. That is Hebron. That's the one I recognize. We talked about that last week, the sacred space of Hebron in the hill country of Judah. Across the Jordan east of Jericho, they selected Bezar in the wilderness plateau from Reuben's tribe, Ramoth in Gilead from Gad's tribe, and Golan in Bashan from Manasseh's tribe. These are the cities appointed for all the Israelites and the aliens residing among them. That's significant. So that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there and not die at the hands of the avenger of blood until he stands before the assembly. A place of refuge. Some scholars point to this, and I didn't read enough of them to say whether this is accurate or not, but some scholars pointed to this as this is part of the foundation for our nation's innocent until proven guilty laws. That we recognize that sometimes somebody needs the opportunity to share their story, share what happened, call witnesses, whatever, have a trial before you automatically assume that someone is guilty. In the ancient world, much of what happened, it wasn't just among the Israelites, is if you killed someone, then their next of kin was their avenger of blood. They were to come and kill you. The purpose of this is to make sure that you can't just kill someone and get away with it, unless you're the government. In that day, that was allowed. But a person could not kill and not have the avenger of blood come after them. And there was no, in the ancient world, to my knowledge, there were no other cultures that provided this kind of system that said, if somebody makes a mistake, the axe flies off the handle, and it wasn't intentional. We're just out chopping wood, the head flies off the handle, and somebody gets killed. There was no way for that person who was just swinging the axe, they weren't doing anything malicious, to be proven innocent. And I would say that the cities of refuge seem to influence even our legal system many generations later in several ways, and that's a powerful thing. But I'm not going to focus today on the legal aspect of this. I want us to focus on what it means to be a place of refuge. There was a theologian in the 1900s named Arthur Pink, and he was from Britain, but he came to the United States and then back and forth a couple of times. He ended up settling in Britain and did a lot of his work through writing. But he viewed the cities of refuge as a comparison to Christ. That is, he said that when you look at the description of the cities of refuge, there's many ways that this is also a description of Christ who would come. And I think that there's a lot of similarities of this. And he had a lot more ways than I'm going to share. I'm not going to take us all day today, but I want us to look at 7 of the things that he said. These are ways that he feels like the cities of refuge were a comparison to Jesus Christ for us. First, the cities of refuge were appointed by God and not by man. They weren't there because somebody thought that this would be a good idea. This was God's idea. And God said, I want you to designate these cities to be places of refuge. They were given to provide shelter from avengers. Jesus was given to provide shelter for us from the avenger, from the one who is after us, from the one who wants to destroy, to kill, or to steal, kill, and destroy. They were placed in visible places. And Jesus was made very visible. He was held up on the cross. The roads were plainly marked around Israel. You could walk around and you would see signs that would point you to these cities of refuge. If you were on the run, if you were running for your life, there were signs to point you in the right direction. There was easy access from anywhere in the country. They didn't put these at the entrance to Glacier National Park. They put them in the middle on the main roads. They put them where people could get to them easily. And there were 6 of them spread out so that no matter where you're at, if an accident happens, you can get there easily. They were available for Jews and Gentiles. That's profound. That a country would say, we want to be a place where people can go for justice, even if they're not one of us. That's important. And the whole system, they would have to stay in the place where they were the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. And the death of the high priest would signify full deliverance, and everything kind of goes back. There's a lot of things that happens when the high priest dies, but this is one of those, that after the high priest, the person, the avenger of blood, no longer has a claim, And this person can now move around freely and go anywhere they want to go. They can go back home. They can go to their lands, to their place. Now, again, this is a clear comparison of Christ. Christ was appointed by God and not by man. He was given to provide shelter from the avenger that chases after us. He was placed in a visible place, and his story has been told. We have his story available to us. It's visible to us. And the way to Christ has been plainly marked. The way that we come to know Christ has been plainly marked. There's easy access from anywhere in the world to Christ. You can find Christ anywhere. Now, there's some governments that try to make it difficult. There's some other religions that try to fight. But God makes himself available even in those situations. Sometime we'll talk about the stories of the Islamic, now Christian leaders in Africa who receive visions of Christ coming to them in their dreams, telling them, "Come search for me." We'll hear the story sometime of a young man who was huddled in his hut. He was set to be the replacement for his father, who was the imam in the village that he was in Ethiopia. And yet he heard across his little transistor radio the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And now Owais is serving as a leader in the Church of the Nazarene in Africa. And he started a Bible study, and of those that he started this Bible study with, there were 12 of them, and only 2 have not been martyred for their faith. Owais is one of those. Sometime I'll tell that story, and I hope that we can have Owais or someone from his family come and share that story. There is access to Christ from anywhere. God makes himself accessible. Christ is acceptable for Jews and Gentiles. Thankfully for those of us in this room, because I don't know that any of us have Jewish blood in us. Maybe we do, but I don't know of any of us that do. And his death as the great high priest, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago in Hebrews, signifies the full deliverance. So we are no longer held in bondage because of the death of the great high priest. That's a powerful reminder for us, but I don't want us to stop there. I've been spending a lot of time lately praying and thinking about the church, and there's a number of reasons for that. Part of that is because our board retreat is coming up. We're going to meet later this month, and there's a lot of this kind of stuff that we're going to wrestle with. What does it mean for us to be the church in this community? What does it mean for us to be God's representatives here now? And so I've been wrestling as I prepare to share my misery with the board as they get to wrestle as well. And then I spent this last week at a church leaders conference in Idaho, and a lot of, my brain is just going like crazy. When I got home last night, I told Janelle, I was like, we're going to have to wait a couple of days to talk about this because there's just a tornado in here. All of these ideas, all of these thoughts, they're going like crazy, and there's so many things that we need to process and think through and talk through, but I was challenged because we're wrestling as a church, which was Nazarene leaders from across the Northwest field, which is all of the states in the Northwest part of the United States. And there were some Canadians there with us as well. We're wrestling with these issues. And so I wanted to think, is there a comparison here between these cities of refuge that God spoke to Joshua and said, set these up? Are there comparisons for the church and these cities of refuge? And I want us to think about that through the lens of what Arthur Pink had designated as the Christ comparison. First of all, the church is appointed by God and not by man. The church exists not because men had a good idea. The church exists because God sent his Spirit, and his Spirit started something. And it is not to be the men and women try to lead this to the best of our ability, but it's not ours. It's his. It's given to provide shelter from avengers. I think the church needs to be a place where people come in and they find shelter from the things that are troubling them, from the realities of life, from the frustrations, the pain, the brokenness of life, that when we come to this place, we encounter God and we find a place of shelter, a place of refuge. Churches are placed in visible places. We're in the process of redoing some of our signage, but we're pretty visible here. You kind of, if you know where River Rock is at, you've been to River Rock, you kind of know where we're at. The way has been plainly marked. As I said, we're working on that because I found that most people think we're the River Rock building because they see the sign that says River Rock, Church of the Nazarene. They don't see Church of the Nazarene. They think this is just the River Rock building, not the Church of the Nazarene. We're working on this. But the way should be plainly marked. Easy access from anywhere. We should be able to get to churches from anywhere. Available for the Jews and the Gentiles. Available for us and them, whoever us and them are. There's a lot of categories that we can put that into today. Us and them. It's available for all. And we are the recipients, and I would say the stewards, of the grace that is offered through the great high priest. We have the privilege to introduce people to the grace that we have received. Not that we hold it over their head in any way. We are stewards to generously give the grace that we have received. But I want us to take this one step further. Yes, we as a church collectively should be this. But what about we as individuals, the members who make up the body? And I'm not talking about official membership here. I'm talking about the people who make up this church. We who consider ourselves a part of this church. We are members of the body. So do these concepts apply to us as well? Do those around us, those that we interact with, see us as places of refuge? Do we act as agents of refuge, even when we're not gathered in this place? It's easy for us to do it when we're here because we're all together, we're reminded of our purpose. But what about when there's a cattle truck that dumps up here and you're stuck in traffic trying to get from Three Forks to Bozeman? As you're on the interstate waiting, are you coming across as an agent of refuge? Or if you're waiting in line at a restaurant and somebody in front of you is taking their time, taking way too much time, and then they change their mind. Do we act as agents of refuge? I would say that as members of the body of Christ, we need to remember that we are appointed to be agents of refuge by God and not by man. By entering into a relationship with him. This is not just, Pastor said I should do this. This is, God said we should do this. We should be agents of refuge. We should be willing to provide shelter from avengers. When we see somebody struggling, we see somebody acting like a jerk, we should be able to come up and come alongside somebody that needs us. We are placed in visible places, but sometimes we need to allow ourselves to be visible and not try to hide in the background. We need to make sure that people know who we are, not in a judgmental, pushy way, but in a way that they sense, they see in us something different. We need to be accessible to people. This is one of the most challenging in our culture, isn't it? We can make ourselves so busy. And when you're working, when you're trying to get everything done, it's easy to be busy. Nobody has to work to be busy. But we need to be accessible. Sometimes that means saying no to good things so we can say no or say yes to better things. We need to be accessible to others. I would say that we need to to be available to those who are like us and those who aren't. Those who may think a little bit differently than us, those who may look a little bit different than us. Because we're all recipients and stewards of the grace that is offered through the great high priest. When God spoke to Joshua, and again, when God speaks in the book of Joshua, it says something significant. How can we be places of refuge? One of the seminars I attended this week, there was an image that was used, and a presenter showed the image. It really wasn't his main point, but I kind of got stuck, and I forget what he said after that. But I've been working on this message in my head all week, and so I knew that this is what I was going to be working on. It's like that image kind of tells a story. And I couldn't help thinking about how that image applies to what I'm talking about being a people of refuge. And it's from a place far south of here, but it was this image. How many of you saw this image? Was it 2017, 2018, something like that, when Harvey hit Houston? And there's a story unfolding here. There's an older gentleman in the Suburban there that his vehicle got washed away. Now, for us, we could spend time talking about, well, he shouldn't have been out there driving anyway. We could spend all kinds of time judging and complaining, criticizing, because that's what we're taught to do. But I want you to look at that human chain of people that said, we don't have time to figure out how to point blame. We got to fix this. One of the things that sticks out to me is the diversity of people going to get this man. There's a lot of racial diversity in there. There's a lot of, you can just tell, we're going to watch a video of it in a minute. There's some different cultures at work here. They're being a place of refuge. There was another human chain that took place at the same time. And I don't have a picture of this one, but I do have the video. We're going to watch both of the videos. They're very short, but between the two of them. And it was a young lady who went into labor. Her apartment was on the first floor, and it was flooded. And it was an apartment complex apparently made up of a bunch of medical students or medical practitioners. She was a doctor herself. She had already miscarried twice, and they anticipated that this child might have some issues. They'd moved her up to the second floor apartment so that she wouldn't be standing in water. And all of the medical students or the medical professionals brought all the medical supplies that they had. But they realized that this mother needed to get to the hospital. And so in this time where calling 911 does nothing because everybody's having an emergency, somebody knew somebody who lived across the street from a fire station, and so they went to the fire station and they said, so-and-so is going into labor, they expect complications, can we get something to go and get this young lady? And they got a dump truck because it's set up high enough they could drive it. And they started driving the dump truck down the street. The husband upstairs saw the dump truck and started running outside. Something's driving, let me go grab it. And he gets outside, and it was somebody that the neighbors had contacted and said, we're here for you. We're here for your wife. And so the neighbors at this apartment complex became a human chain. For this lady who's in labor, I don't know how far the contractions were. I didn't see her double over as she's walking, but she's just grabbing a hold from one neighbor to the next to make her way through the floodwaters to this truck. And as we watch these two videos, I want us to think about, what does it mean for us to be the people of God, to be places of refuge? That we would cling together in our diversity, in our differences, and say, how do we love the world around us? What does it mean for us to be those people? Because I'm guessing that every person in this room can point to somebody else that was a part of that for us. And as our world has grown more and more divided and we fight with each other over every stinking thing, We need to remember that we're supposed to be a place of refuge. We're supposed to be people of refuge. It's not up to us to critique everything that somebody says in their Facebook post. By the way, I need to clarify, it's Brittany who's doing our social media stuff. So if you see her talking about all you lovely people, that's not my language, just so you know. That's Brittany. And I appreciate that she's doing it, but I saw that this morning. It's like, I need to make sure you know that's not me. But we don't fight about that stuff. We want to encourage, we want to support, we want to be people and places of refuge. So I want us to watch these videos, and again, they're not long, but allow God to speak to you about what do you have to bring to the table? Who do you know that is in need of a place of refuge? This is the Are we a people of refuge? Do we see ourselves as a part of a human chain that's looking for people who are struggling and saying, how can we reach out to them? How can we be what they need in this moment? Can we be a people of refuge? We know that Christ is a place of refuge for us. I think everyone in this room this morning is here because Christ has been a place of refuge for us. And if you don't know that Christ is a place of refuge, please talk to me. I'd love to explain to you how Christ is a place of refuge for us. Are we as a body helping to be a place of refuge? And we as a body can't do it unless we as members of the body are doing it. Are we as a people being places of refuge that point people to Him? As our worship team comes up, we're going to close with the song, I Refuse. The song, I Refuse, was written probably about 13 or 14 years ago after some massive floods went through Nashville. I don't know if you remember that or not. It's been a while and seems like we're inundated with massive floods all the time. But some massive floods had gone through Nashville, and a young musician named Josh Wilson was new to Nashville. He'd just been there. He was trying to get his career started as a Nashville musician. And he saw these stories on the news, and he was seeing all of these people who were struggling, and their homes had been flooded, and he said, God, send somebody to help them. And he said he felt like God spoke in an audible voice and said, I did get out there. And so this song is a response. It's a response that says, I refuse to come up with another excuse to not do what God has called me to do. I refuse. And the song starts with a very troubling but honest line. Sometimes I just want to close my eyes and act like everybody's okay when I know they're not. What does it mean for us to be places of refuge? It means being people who refuse to close our eyes and make excuses, even though they're good excuses. We're all busy. We've all got stuff going on. It means that we look for ways that we can represent Christ in the world that we're in. Let's stand together as we close. Father, thank you so much for being a place of refuge, for establishing these places of refuge. Thank you for sending your Son as a place of refuge, for sending your Spirit to create us into a place of refuge. And I pray, Father, that you would help us to be the people here in River Rock, in Belgrade, in the Gallatin Valley, who are a people of refuge. God, we don't know what this is going to look like. We don't know what you're doing, but we want to be obedient to you. We don't want to close our eyes and act like everybody's all right. We know they're not. God, help us. Help us to keep our eyes on you. And help us to see those around us and to fight for their needs, to fight to be there for them. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's sing together.